Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gabbert.
Gentle and restrained with us. He's patient with us. This is in His own strength.
Okay, I'm going to ask kind of a silly question for starters. Anybody ever had a boss they didn't like?
Yes.
Some of you have bosses you don't like right now, right? Here's the thing. When you have a boss that you don't like, it's a lot like somebody being in charge of you that wants to think of themselves as a leader, but they don't know what leading is. Right? They're just in charge, but they're not a leader. And so the things they do exhibit the fact that they are, in fact, in the position of being in charge, but they don't have the first idea how to get you on board, how to motivate you to move in a certain direction. We like to call those people managers, right? Like it's typically all it is. It's somebody that's managing you, but they are not leading you. That person will usually act like they're the hero, right? They like to highlight all the things that they're doing, but it's really hypocritical, right? They uphold certain rules, they bend others, they hold you to all of them, right? And then when nobody's looking, what happens? When somebody leads like that, what happens when they're gone? Nobody does anything.
Chaos.
Yeah, chaos, right? It's kind of like if Michael Scott was your boss, right?
Oh no.
Right? Like when you watch that show, what happens every time he's out of the office? They do whatever they want to do. It's just game time, mess around time, slack off time, right? That is somebody who is not actually a leader, but is constantly pointing at themselves and saying, man, I'm just doing a great job. You know, in that show, right, he's got that mug that says #1 boss, and you find out like really early in the show, like he bought himself that mug. Right? It's that kind of leader. And you're like, yeah, no one ever gave you that. Like, because no one thinks that about you. You know? Whereas when you're following a real leader, that person inspires you to want to follow them. As a matter of fact, if you're following somebody who's good at leadership, you will do things you don't want to do for them. That happens all the time. Great leaders know how to inspire people, motivate people, and move people all the time. They're not hypocritical. They're not just in charge by virtue of their position. They lead, right? And the best example of someone who leads is Jesus. He leads us towards Himself, towards God, towards right living, right? He does all of these things, but what do we know about Jesus? He wasn't a hypocrite. He didn't tell you, hey, you got to do better. And then fall short somewhere and hold you to a standard that He didn't achieve. Right? So, we're in this series on Judges, and we spent the last 2 weeks talking about Gideon. And Gideon's honestly come out looking pretty good so far. And if you just stop in those first couple of chapters of Gideon, it's easy to kind of look at Gideon and think, I don't know, I keep being told there's like no real positive characters in Judges, but seems to be doing a great job. Well, the key is finishing out Gideon's story. Because today we're going to be in chapter 8, and we're going to see Gideon pretend to be the king. The first thing he's going to do is he's going to pretend to still be the leader that he's supposed to be. He's in charge, but we're going to see how much he sucks at being in charge. How much he is not equipped to be in charge. And what's the difference? We've seen Gideon lead. We've seen him be empowered to lead. We saw people follow him in mass. We saw him lead the nation of Israel to this massive victory. But the difference is God is now absent from this story. God has taken a back seat because Gideon has put himself in charge. He is going to be taking God's position as king right now in his own life and in the way that he leads the people of Israel. And so, since God is not in it and God is not empowering him, he is going to now be an absolute failure as a leader. He's going to be the exact opposite of what we need in a leader. So look at chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Then the men of Ephraim said to Gideon, "What is this thing that you have done to us, not calling upon us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they quarreled with him vehemently. But he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is the gleaning of grapes in Ephraim not better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has handed over to you the leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger towards him subsided when he said that. Okay, so they've just won this battle, right? They've just had this massive win, and they've defeated the Midianites that have been terrorizing them for 7 years. And what's the first thing that happens? We get another glimpse at the further Canaanization of Israel. Because the first thing the Ephraimites do is go, "Hey, what about us? Why didn't we get to take a bigger role in this?" Right? They're immediately self-centered. They're immediately about themselves instead of glorifying in what God has just done. Instead of glorifying in who God has used, they're upset because they didn't get enough of a part. They didn't get to do the bigger thing, right? And then Gideon here, Gideon's answer on a surface level looks pretty good because he takes kind of this humble approach and he says, "Well, what was I even able to do? You guys killed their leaders." But here's the thing. You have to see what's missing from Gideon's response. He's just had this big victory. He's just walked through all of these things. God has prepared him, equipped him, used him. And what does he not say? He doesn't say, "Guys, I didn't do this. God did this. God was the one who called on me. God was the one who told me how. God was the one who accomplished the victory." He doesn't point people to God and help them see God and glorify God. He just does the political answer. He just flatters them, right? That phrase where he says, "Is the gleaning of your grapes not better than the vintage?" If you understand about wine, right? When they produce wine, the very early stages after you've gleaned the grapes and you've produced the wine, it's not good yet. It has to age, right? And when it's aged long enough, that's a vintage. Right? And he's saying the best my tribe has, our vintage, isn't even as good as your fresh stuff. The stuff that you've just produced. Right? This is a silver-tongued response. This is a political response, right? But it doesn't point people to the glory of God. It just gets him out of the hot seat in this moment. Look in verse 4. Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, exhausted yet still pursuing. And he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give me loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" So Gideon said, "For this answer, when the Lord has handed over to me Zebah and Zalmunna, I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Then he went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them. And the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Succoth had answered. So he went to the men of Penuel. So he said to the men of Penuel, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies were with them about 15,000 men. All who were left of the entire army of the people of the east, for the fallen were 120,000 swordsmen. Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in the tents of the east of Nobah and camped in Jogbehah. And he attacked the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them and captured the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the entire army. Okay. So the first thing you need to see about this section is that Gideon is no longer delivering the people of Israel, right? Because everything that has come before this point has been a war of deliverance that God is the one that produced, and that deliverance was designed to preserve and protect his people. Gideon has left Israel. He is on a blood quest. He's on a pursuit. This is a vengeance thing. Right? This is for his own glorification. This is his own idea. He's no longer preserving and defending Israel. He's just out to get the remnant of this army, of these people that have been attacking them. Now, he gets these kind of rebuffed answers, right? So you can kind of see the nations of Israel, the tribes, of Israel, that would have been closer to the enemy. That's who he's talking to. Maybe they're gun shy about helping, right? Because if he's failure, they're going to be the one closest to retribution from the Midianites. Like, they don't want to be seen as helping him, right? This goes further to show you the Canaanization of Israel, this split and fractured tribes that are not helping each other and not being brothers to each other. But regardless, his answer is still somewhat diplomatic. Why? Because he's got 300 men that are tired and they still have a fight ahead of them. So instead of dealing with them right then and there, he says, you know what, when I come back, I'm going to handle you. I'm gonna take care of the problem here. And then we see the plan unfold. So he attacks the camp at night. It's by surprise. He defeats them. It's the exact same plan. He uses the exact same plan the first time, except this time it's him doing it. Right? The first time, God is the one who created the victory, who routed the enemies. This time, Gideon is the one that's doing it. So now, why is he able to do that? Well, here's the thing. When armies are being routed throughout all of human history, but much less in the ancient times, they're pretty jumpy. Getting attacked again, especially this far, they think they're safe, they think they've traveled, and then all of a sudden, here's this same guy that just beat them, killed so many of their brothers, their soldiers, and he shows up again, attacks in the exact same way. So they panic. So he has a second victory. It's a much easier victory this time. There's less troops. They're still scared. But nonetheless, it's his victory. So now he's building confidence on how much of this he is doing. Do you know what strikes me, though, about Gideon's behavior here? What have we known about Gideon from beginning to end of his story? He's a coward. He's insecure in himself. He's afraid to do what God tells him to do. He's afraid of other people. What is the defining character trait of a bully? Somebody who's insecure and scared and has just a little bit more strength than you. Like, that's all bullies are. And we're watching Gideon transform in front of our very eyes into a bully because he's always been insecure. He's always been afraid. And now he has just enough power. He has just enough strength. And so now he's going to start picking on the very people that God called him to protect and defend. Look in verse 13. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. And he captured a youth from Succoth and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the leaders of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary? Then he took the elders of the city and the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with them. And he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Okay, look at how far we've come. The same guy that was hiding in a hole at the beginning of the story is now killing Israelites. He's now abusing and killing Israelites. Why? Because they didn't support him. Not because they're in unrepentance to God or they are worshiping idols. It's because they didn't do what he told them to do. He has gone full circle into now being the oppressor. He just delivered Israel by God's grace, and now he's taunting them like a vindictive child. He's like, here's the guys. I got them. You said I wasn't going to get them, but I got them, and now I'm coming for you, right? He captures a kid. He gets a list of names, people he's going to go bully. And then this part of the story ends with him murdering people. Right? This is not a good look for Gideon. I want you to see the comparison between this leader and who God is. Does God have absolute power? Does God have the power to destroy anybody and everybody at any moment? Could God destroy anybody who doesn't obey him? Yeah, first of all, we'd all be gone. But second of all, he doesn't because he has all of that power
and He's gentle and restrained with us. He's patient with us. Right? This is a worldly leader. This is a fake leader. God is a real leader. God, Jesus and God, they are patient and gentle. I've told people this before. I was talking to somebody they were dealing with somebody who was handling something in their life immaturely. We've all been there, some drama, and one of these people is clearly the more mature and also smart enough to make this situation go away on their own. Handle it themselves, if you will, right? But not necessarily in a graceful and patient way. And I asked the person I was talking to, I said, okay, if I was standing in the parking lot and a 6-year-old kid came up and took a swing at me, would it be the right answer for me to just let that kid have it? 6-year-old kid just going down. I could, but that's not the right answer. Don't punch a 6-year-old, right? We have to demonstrate patience and leadership. God is patient and gentle with us. And here's the thing. To God, you're the 6-year-old. You're the one with no power to hurt Him swinging. And He has all the power. But He doesn't just leverage it against you in an oppressive and cruel way. And that's exactly what Gideon's doing right here. He's just leveraging his strength in an oppressive way. This is not of God. This is not what God has. So look at verse 19. I'm sorry. Yeah, look at verse... I stopped at 17. Look at verse 18. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "Where were the men whom you killed at Tabor?" But they said, You and they were alike, each one resembling the son of a king. And he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if only you had let them live, I would not kill you." Okay, stop right here for a second. I want you to notice something. First of all, we now have a glimpse inside of what's going on. Again, this is personal for Gideon. This is his own blood quest, because now we've seen that at some point in the past, the Midianites, how many people have they oppressed, killed, hurt, right? But they've managed to kill people in Gideon's life. But he's departed from God's motives, from God's, from what God is doing here to his own personal benefit. This is about him. He is getting vengeance. He is handling this in his own power. And so then in verse 20 it says, I'm sorry. I'm getting out of track here. The other thing I want to mention is this. They call him a son of a king. These are two kings of Midian, and they call him a son of a king. This is important. What they are doing in that moment is they're actually calling him out and demeaning him that he's not a king. He appears to be important. He appears to have some kind of power, but he's not a king. They're actually saying, we are kings. You just look like a son of a king. And think about this. Kings in that period, they would have had a lot of wives and a lot of kids. So being the son of a king, sure, you might have some power, some authority, but you're not important. Nobody cares about you. And that's exactly, they're condescending to him in this moment, which goes into the further conversation. Look in verse 20. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Rise, kill them." But the youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise up yourself and attack us, for as the man, so is his strength." So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent amulets which were on their camels' necks. Okay, so first of all, this king, right? Gideon's starting to assume this role. He's in charge. But what's his, best attendant that he's got to commit this execution? One of his kids. It's still a kid is the point of that passage, right? And the kid is scared, right? He didn't go on this journey with them. He's not a warrior. They've brought them back home, and he says, "Off with their heads." And his kid's what? Right? And just hesitates, right? And then they call him out again. And this, you might even see this as God trying to get his attention in letting these guys say, "Why don't you do it? You're so strong. You're so important. Rise up and do your own dirty work." And he does. He kills them, right, with his own hand. Again, this is in his own strength. Everything we're seeing here is Gideon. Gideon's in charge. Gideon's the leader. Gideon is going to be the king. That is what's happening here. Look at verse 22. When the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son's son as well, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Okay. Now, after the whole book of Judges, where we've seen that they are, what? Kingless. Now, they want a ruler. They say, "You rule over us." Notice they don't ask him to be king. They ask him to be a ruler. Why? Because this is an entirely illegitimate endeavor. They don't want to give him total power, and they're not following any of the rules set out in Deuteronomy for how a king would be chosen or how a king would be in place or the rules by which a king would live. They're just asking Gideon to be in charge, right? And on top of wanting the protection that he provides, he also just killed some other Israelites. So they're like, well, better than the Midianites, don't want to die by his hand. Hey, why don't you be in charge, right? So they opt for him to be the best answer. Why? They say that he saved them. We've now missed the whole point. We've now missed everything that's happened up to here, that God has been the one delivering them, that God even was the one who equipped Gideon, called Gideon, prepared Gideon, that nothing Gideon did could have happened except by God's hand. And they say, "You saved us." Listen, God is the only one that saves. There is nothing in your life, nothing you follow, nothing you care about that can save you but the hand of God. That's it. Do you want to follow this guy? Like, does this guy look like the leader that you would enjoy following and being submissive to? Right? Because here's the thing. Everything in your life that you submit to, that you follow, that isn't Jesus, it dominates you just like Gideon is. It bullies you. It doesn't care about you. It's not good for you. It's not the righteous king. But this is the kind of leader, this is the kind of thing in our life that we follow. Jesus is gentle and patient and a leader and not a hypocrite, right? All of the things that we should naturally want to follow. He's the best kind of leader. Pretend leaders always have pretend humility. So we're back to the number one boss mug, right? That you bought for yourself, right? There's always the person that is in charge but just pretending to be a leader. Somehow they always find a way to point out all the great things about them, all the things they do well. But their mistakes and the problems they have are glaringly obvious. Look at verse 23. But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Yet Gideon said to them, "I would request of you, that each of you give me an earring from his plunder." For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they said, "We will certainly give them to you." So they spread out a garment, and every one of them tossed an earring there from his plunder. And the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, apart from the crescent amulets and the ear pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and apart from the neck chains that were on their camels' necks. Okay. Is this true humility or not? He says, "I'm not going to rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Well, how do you judge someone's heart? How do you see if this is real humility? By the actions that follow. What are the actions that follow Gideon making that claim? He says, "I'm not going to rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." But here's a tax. And I'm going to keep all the purple robes, the color of royalty. And I'm going to keep all the kingly garments and garb. And not only that, but that tax, it's not just a tax, it's a loyalty check. Everybody line up, bring an earring by, put it in the middle of this cloth. We'll see who doesn't do it. We'll see who won't pay the tax, who won't show me that they're on board with what's happening here. Right? Gideon says with lip service, the diplomatic answer, no, God's going to rule over you. and then proceeds to do all the things a king does. He starts collecting money. He starts setting up for himself. And here's the other thing. It's actually brilliant by Gideon because now he gets the benefit of all the things that being in charge brings and none of the responsibility. He doesn't have to do anything, but he still gets to get rich. He still gets to look important. He gets to act important. He gets to see that nobody's going to challenge him, but he doesn't have to protect anybody. He doesn't have to do anything. Look at verse 27. Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in the city of Ophrah. But all Israel committed infidelity with it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his household. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore. And the land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Okay. We are right back at the beginning of Gideon's story. What was the first thing we learned about Gideon? His dad hosted an idol worship site in their backyard. By the way, that would have been a lucrative business. He would have made a lot of money. This is actually one of the big critiques that happens later, right? We see that the Israelites themselves, they make the worship of Yahweh in the temple into a business model. If you controlled the system of worship, you could make sure that it benefited you monetarily. That is what Gideon is setting up right now. He creates an ephod. Now, we know from other parts of the Bible that an ephod is like the priestly kind of chess piece. It doesn't appear to be the same thing here. And I looked into this as much as they know. What they think this is actually implying is some kind of chess piece, but the implication is that he's put this gold chess piece on an image, on an idol. So he's created an altar that's ornate and beautiful for the people of Israel to come worship, and now he's going to be able to sustain making money. He's going to be able to control loyalty by who's coming to worship and how much they have to pay or sacrifice or tribute to worship. We know from the Bible that God gives grace to the humble. And humility looks like repentance. The one thing that is still missing from the entire book of Judges. Repentance. This is the opposite of humility. This is utter and complete pride. Gideon is pointing to himself. Why did God break Gideon's army down to 300 before the first attack? He was ensuring that neither Gideon nor Israel could think that they did this. And what has happened? The people of Israel think Gideon did it, and apparently so does Gideon. They missed the point. God took it to astronomical odds, and they still didn't acknowledge who did it. This happens in our own lives. We'll beg God to handle something, and as soon as He comes through, we're like, coincidence. I'm glad that worked out. And then we just go on about our merry way. We don't even bother to thank God for what He did or change our lives to serve Him and follow Him. That's what Gideon's doing right here. Why did God use Gideon? God used Gideon because he was weak. God used Gideon because he was going to be faithful. We see in verse 28 that God's whole purpose in this was to preserve His people. So God's will has been accomplished. He is preserving the nation of Israel. But in God's grace and patience and preservation of the people of Israel, they are falling back into the same exact sin that they've been in from the beginning. Look at verse 29. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. I want to stop right there for a second. 29. That phrase doesn't where else are you going to go live? I live in my own house. That's not what that phrase means. That phrase basically implies rulership. He didn't just live in his house. He was in charge from his house. Right? That's the way that is structured and framed, is to again imply he said, I'm not going to be the ruler, and then he's doing everything a ruler does. Now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, and he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son named Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. He goes and he sits and rules, and he rules in complete luxury. He rules in complete luxury. He acquires wives, which we know is immoral and ungodly. Even in this time period, they were told not to do that repeatedly. Solomon's collapse is basically because he has so many wives. So he's collecting all of these women, and it makes special mention of his Canaanite concubine. That's fancy Old Testament word for prostitute, right? But yes, a slave prostitute. And it would have been she would have been owned by him, but she was Canaanite. That's the important piece. She was a foreigner, right? Again, these are all things that God has regulated, that God has told them, do not do this, because these things will bring you down. They will cause you to live in sin. Bad leaders are hypocrites. That's what's happening here. Gideon is taking all of the stuff that makes him look like a king, but he's a complete hypocrite. He's living in sin. He's acting in sin. He's not protecting anyone else. Let's think about this in reference to Jesus for a second. Jesus, what did his life look like? Utter humility and suffering. Jesus' life was the exact opposite of constantly acquiring the most luxurious things and the most fancy stuff and the stuff that made him look the best. It was constantly the denial of himself from his birth to his death. He was born in a barn, like a feeding trough. Right? And he dies as a criminal and a cursed man on the cross. The exact opposite kind of life of Gideon. Utter humility. Not hypocritical. Jesus called us to follow him, to suffer for him, to be his servant in everything we do, but he lived it out. He was God's servant. He was humble. He suffered. He denied himself. He did everything the Bible asks you to do. Everything. Gideon did none of it. Pretend humility also leads to a process of pretend loyalty. As soon as the boss is out, no work's getting done. Nobody cares. That guy sucks. I'm just done. I'm not going to do what he says unless he's looking over my shoulder, right? Look in verse 33. Then it came about, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel again committed infidelity with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. So the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had saved them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accordance with all the good that he had done for Israel. As soon as he dies, he's in the grave, and they're like, screw that guy. They're just done immediately with him, right? What does that show us? There's no real loyalty. There's no real love. They don't care about Gideon. They liked the benefits he gave. Maybe he was a strong enough ruler that they thought, better not cross him while he's here. But as soon as he was out the door, nobody cared. Nobody even tried to do right by him, to do right by his family. It didn't matter. Here's the best part. It says that they went and got Baal-berith as their god. You know what Baal-berith means? Baal, the god of the covenant. It's an exact one-for-one swap with Yahweh. Yahweh is the God of their covenant. And instead of going to Yahweh, they go find this false counterfeit version. And they begin to worship that. Do you know why the author, up until the last moments, is still referring to Gideon as Jerubbaal? What does that name mean? Let Baal contend with him? He's saying Gideon lived to this ripe old age. He died peacefully. God took care of him. Baal never contended with him. So what did they just do? They went and found a God that couldn't handle one of the weakest members of their nation. The coward, the bully. The God that they now serve couldn't take care of that guy. That's how weak Baal is. It's not a mistake that those are side by side. They say, let Baal contend. This guy lived to a ripe old age. No one ever contended with him. And now you're worshiping that guy. Couldn't do it. That is how weak false gods are. There's also more Canaanization here. We see more of this degradation of Israel, this civil instability we have going on because they don't care about any kind of centralized structure. They're not a nation. They're tribes, right? So here's my question for you in all this. Do you act towards God like He is the boss that's just out of the room? Like, do you come to church, and that's when God's like watching, so you mind your P's and Q's, but then Monday through Saturday, you act like God is a bad leader and a hypocrite who asks you to do things that He can't do and wouldn't do, and you just do whatever you want to do? See, I fear that oftentimes we don't acknowledge how great of a God we serve. And we don't serve Him with real loyalty. Because our God is not a pretend king. He's not a pretend leader. He has real humility. And He doesn't deserve pretend loyalty. Why would you serve the one true God in the same way that these Israelites seem to have served Gideon? As soon as you feel like God's not paying attention, you just do whatever you want to do. But instead, what do you serve? What do you give real loyalty to? When nobody's looking, when you have your own decision to make, you serve all the things of this world. You serve all your sins. And what are those sins doing? They're doing exactly what Gideon did. They're bullying you. They are condemning you and oppressing you. They have nothing to offer you. You know, most of our sins don't care if we live or die. Think about that. I mean, look, it's a young adult room, so I'm not going to shy away from the words that make us get a little fidgety in our seats. If you're stuck and condemned by something like pornography or sex outside of marriage, it's trying to kill you. The porn industry doesn't care about you. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it doesn't care what kind of havoc it wreaks on your personal life. It doesn't even know you exist. But you serve it with complete loyalty. You're faithful to it. You visit it on a regular basis. You keep it secret. It's the Baal Berith. It's the counterfeit replacement that can't do anything for you. But you could be loyal to a king who loves you and cares about you and wants to fulfill you and sustain you. And that's just an example, by the way. Like, that may not be your struggle. Maybe your struggle is drugs or alcohol. Or maybe your struggle is your spending habits or just your eating habits. I don't know what it is that you're counterfeit, that you're Baal Berith. But it's fake. It's counterfeit. It's oppressive. It leads to death. James says that the final result of our sin is death. Let's talk about that for a second. Every time you sin, do you just drop dead? No. But you do feel a separation from your king. And we're designed to run off of that connection with Him. We're designed to be fulfilled and sustained by that connection to Him. So when that connection is broken in our sin, every single time, it's a taste of death. It's killing you. God is the perfect boss, the perfect king. Quit serving pretend kings or quit trying to be king yourself. It's not a good look. It doesn't ever work out the way you want it to. Offer your loyalty to the real king. How do you do that? That's this relationship we're always talking about with Jesus Christ. It is acknowledging that He saved you and then serving Him. See, they seem to acknowledge that Gideon saved them. They don't serve Him. They just want his benefits. Or they don't want his consequences. Are you treating God like that? You just want his benefits? Or you don't want his consequences? That's not service. That's not love. That's not a relationship. That's pretend. You may know that in your head, but that's not in your heart. That's what you got to get figured out. Don't treat God like he's the pretend king. He's the righteous king.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.